Have you ever felt like you were going crazy in a relationship, constantly confused and questioning your own reality? Did you find yourself slowly and slowly drifting away from the people you trusted most, not even because you wanted to, but because it was just easier than dealing with the conflict that it caused at home? What if what you experienced wasn't just a bad relationship, but a meticulously designed system with its own set of rules? Today, we're giving that system a name, the two-person cult. And I'm going to walk you through the framework that explains exactly how it works. So, first, we're going to start with the first pillar, which is the power dynamic inside the relationship. Now, in the context of an abusive relationship as a two-person cult, the relationship becomes a closed system where the abuser or the harm doer is the sole source of truth, validation, and reality. Only their version of truth is acceptable, or it creates conflict. Only validation from them is acceptable, or you are made to feel smaller, and only their reality is acceptable, or you're left to question your own reality. This ultimately, like all of these reactions, it ultimately kind of results in having an imposed worldview, not a worldview of your choosing, but sort of like a special set of unspoken rules that are, that does amount to sort of abandoning your own worldview in a quest for the subtext of safety or like physical safety, and not only that, validation, but within the context of being completely isolated, which has that much more power and relevance. Not only that, this imposed worldview sort of becomes a shared narrative about what is okay, what is real, and what is true within the relationship and beyond the relationship. And the thing is, living with an imposed worldview, accepting it, which is kind of an oxymoron because it is imposed, it being it taking on this worldview for survival, it systematically erodes your trust in your own perception. For example, in the abusive relationship I was in, I was constantly confused. I felt like um, I just constantly felt like that I was wrong, my thoughts were wrong, my feelings were wrong, but it didn't like, or I didn't, my thoughts, my feelings, my sense of being was all wrong, but that didn't quite feel right, which is why I was confused. Like I'm being told and I'm understanding that I'm wrong, but this alternative doesn't quite feel right. So the where I landed was confusion. Not only that, I became increasingly further removed from my own true self and also the world. And in this isolation, I sort of went to the only other person in this world in the world that I was existing in, to make sense of things and almost like to have like permission for like my feelings to be real, for my thoughts to be valid or not crazy. And honestly, it just resulted in endless fights. And I just increasingly over time had a deepening sense of inherent wrongness in my being, of my being. And when the power dynamic looks like that within a relationship, what this looks like and what this means is that one person has the power and the safety to define what reality is, just like cult leaders. And not only that, if you question that reality, that's perceived as a threat to life and a way of being, very similar to how questioning things sort of shows up within the context of a cult, which this actually brings it's the perfect transition to the next pillar, which is creating a shared enemy, right? So, challenge questioning the shared reality means you're a threat, and so in this shared enemy, it's sort of like an us versus them mentality that is really cultivated and like really grown. Us is the people who believe what we believe, um, putting we because what we just said about what's allowed to be believed. But like the us is people who believe what we believe, people who are right, and people who participate in that set of rules, which just so happens to be the people in that relationship. Them is everyone else, is haters. Them are problematic people. That was the language used within the context of the relationship I was in. Them is all those problematic people everywhere in the world. And so this is how, outside like my outside relationships towards like this is what it looks like when outside relationships are sort of systemically dismantled by labeling friends, enemies, or friends, families, therapists, anyone on the outside as enemies of the relationship. But I really have to emphasize that this is very subtle and it's not direct. It didn't, at least in the way that I experienced it, that it was not like, oh, so and so is bad, so and so is an enemy. It was more sort of like, um, their ideas are bad, or these thoughts and this perspective is bad, or not good, or sus, or like, it always carried the subtext of wrongness. And which also meant that if I referenced those ideas, thoughts, or perspectives, if I agreed with them, or if I even brought up those perspectives, I now have that association of badness and wrongness. And it's sort of, and again, it's something that is not said, but part one in part because of like the threat of violence that just sort of exists as a hanging cloud, and two, also just sort of the really positioning as these things around or attached to these people are not good or just not great. That's sort of how that's communicated. And within the context of this two-person cult, you're left to make the conclusion on, they are bad. Um, and not only that, and I'll share an example like of how it felt for me to experience this. Anytime I chose to entertain or engage with these enemies, it became a sin that I had to atone for. I in and that looked like by rescinding my own thoughts and opinions. It looked like rolling back a boundary. It looked like affirming the abuser's point of view and building them up. It looked like providing that emotional labor to make them feel good about this wrong or bad thing, by not just like totally falling in line with whatever opinion or perspective they decided was the truth, right? And there was also this subtext of, you know, you become bad and you can never ever make up for it, but you sure as hell can't ever stop trying. And all of this weight, all of this emotional labor, all of this tension, all of these like the loss of like like personal opinion, just perspectives, just from having a different perspective, and not only that, doing all of this sort of like emotional gymnastics just to try to stay safe. And like that's the thing I really want to emphasize to you. And I'm also speaking to like other versions of me who have survived through this, to have compassion for herself, is like all of this happens within the context of this is what you do to stay safe. And the taking on this imposed worldview is was a strategy that kept me alive. And so I'm just saying that out loud because if you're feeling the things and you're like maybe judging that former version of yourself, I am sharing this because having this understanding was the pathway towards compassion for myself. So I just need to say that out loud before I move on to the next and last pillar. All right, y'all? Okay, so then we have the third pillar, and this is the deprogramming process. Okay, this is basically the idea that healing from intimate partner violence is you don't just leave and you're done. It is the healing journey is a process much like deprogramming, right? It means that have to find a way to acclimate back into the real world and rediscover your own beliefs after leaving the two-person cult's reality. And I would argue it's really challenging after leaving an abusive relationship or getting out, because you know within the context of the abuse, it doesn't have that label of you left an organization, you left a worldview, you left a mindset. It's just done and gone. And for me and my healing journey, I did not even realize that even though I had physically left, I still had all of these beliefs, thoughts, and perspectives that were a part of the two-person cult. And it took me and continue to take like different aspects of it, just takes time to one, identify, two, compassionately understand, and three, release and heal. And it's such an ongoing process. And so I'll share some examples of what the deprogramming process looked like for me. So this one is for when I immediately got out. So I left with the idea and the understanding that I was the problem, that I was impossible to love, and not only that, I just make things so hard. And so I left with that was one of the ideas, one of the shared narratives that existed within that abusive relationship. Another one was, my family and friends, people I know, anything I happen to feel inspired by is problematic. Like literally anything. That's another episode for another day. But anyone I was inspired by was somehow problematic. So I left with these two things, that I was a problem, that I'm impossible to love, and my family and friends are problematic. So that this created a really interesting situation for me when I had left, because they were helping me. Like I was accepting help from people, and I honestly initially I felt these two conflicting feelings. I felt like one, I felt like an absolute burden. And two, I felt suspicious of them because at the time, I could not fathom that people were helping me because they loved me. Like I was still operating with the belief that with that imposed belief that these people are problematic and they do these things out of all of these reasons. But like I could not fathom that people were showing up for me because they love me and for no other reason. Not because they wanted to get something out of me, not because they were working out their ego or these other things. Like I couldn't fathom it. And it made me it made one, it made asking for help really hard because I just didn't want to do it because one, I felt like a burden, and two, I was like, who would want to help me for what reason? And it really wasn't until I think maybe 2 months after I had gotten out, I did a New York trip with friends, and like it really sunk into me. I'm like, oh my God, like these people love me, and that's literally the only reason why they're doing something. But it literally took me at the time, I had that realization finally 2 months after getting out. 2 to 3 months after getting out. And still, after I realized that, like, oh, I mean, I continue to kind of feel like a burden, but the whole belief that these people are problematic and they have these ulterior motives, like, it, 2 weeks, 2 months of no contact with this person, and that belief still held true um until I had overwhelming evidence and like just had the discomfort that I needed to recognize, maybe this belief isn't true. And not only that, I continue to realize the more and more time I spend with these people that that has never been true, that these people have always loved me, have always showed up for me. So like I realized I took on that belief, and it not only did it replace my belief, it sort of like created a revisionist history with and sort of created some amnesia around like what my actual experience of people were. So like that's part of like the deprogramming, right? Is like getting out and realizing what's true, and then not only that, but like rewriting and covering all the narratives that and experiences that you had to explain this worldview. Okay, here's another example. So another belief and idea that was a part of the two-person cult that I was a part of was that I was wrong and problematic for wanting to make money, for wanting to make enough money to be okay. Not only that, because so I worked in education and have done many, many things and eventually decided to start my own business. And one of the things that came within the two-person cult that I was a part of, my decision to sort of freelance and start a business meant that I was participating. I wasn't just participating in, I was perpetuating all the isms and a part of actively oppressing everyone and everybody in the world. Full stop. I'm honestly amazed that I was able to like do anything while operating with this belief within the context of that relationship. But when I left, I physically left, but I carried that belief right on with me. And within that, I had left with so little to no resources, right? Like I really left, it was just really bad. Things had gotten really, really bad. And I left, despite things being that bad, I left and I felt like I had no options to make money. And which was wild, but I felt like I had no options to make money because the options that I perceived, they were all problematic and they all perpetuated harm. That was the framework that existed in that relationship, and I took it with me. And not only that, I was holding this belief alongside the reality that I had no resource, I did not have the resources I need to to create safety for myself and to make self-honoring choices. I didn't have the money I needed to be safe, like in the world, to be able to live on my own and to move independently and freely in a safe way. I didn't have money for that. And yet I still felt like I had no options for how to make money. Not only that, as a part of sort of operating in this belief, I like shied away from and even turned away opportunities that I felt like were problematic. And this sort of like continued until I literally ran out of money. Like it's a real place, y'all. I don't wish it on anybody, but I ran out of money and I, I like to say the universe brought me to surrender. And I really, when I got to that place, I really had to take a look at like how, without judgment and with as much compassion and care as possible, I had to take a look at why in the hell am I in this situation? And I eventually evaluated everything that I felt were options and weren't. And I eventually realized, damn, Sable, these beliefs are not even my beliefs. Like, I realized that I have options to make money. I realized that I, that one, money is a safety issue, and I am not evil for making sure that I have it and that I do what I can to get it to make sure that I am safe. I also realize that I trust myself. I trust the way that I show up in the world and that I can transform any space I'm a part of, no matter where I choose to be. And that's not perpetuating isms. That's creating radical change and radical shift. And when I look at my life and career and the spaces that I've been in, that's something I've always done. But because of this sort of imposed belief that wasn't mine initially, but I took on to stay safe, I couldn't see any of that. And it took me like finally having that realization. I think I'd been out for almost 2 years at that point. And so yeah, that's, leaving is deprogramming. You physically leave, but there are some beliefs that, that the healing, this is why people say healing is not linear. Like it just takes time to get there. So that is the framework of the two-person cult. It's a system designed to replace your reality with someone else's. And having the language to see it for what it is the first step towards dismantling it. So go you. We did that. We did that. Okay. If this framework resonated with you and you want to explore these ideas even further, I have a treat for y'all. I've written a deep dive companion article for you. The link is right at the top of the description below, so please check it out. And as we discussed, leaving the cult is just the beginning. The real work is in the deprogramming of it all. This Monday, I'm releasing a short video that dives specifically into what that means, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. Thank you so much for holding space with me, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, y'all.